"Ma'am, this line is for business class passengers only." The words cut like a blade, sharp, cold, in public. Heads turned, eyes narrowed, phones lifted, some subtly, others not. Janelle Warren, standing tall in a navy wool coat and black trousers, didn't move. She wasn't loud. She wasn't holding up the line. She wasn't doing anything, except existing where someone thought she shouldn't. The airline staffer behind the boarding podium, Camille, a tall, polished white woman in Argent Air's navy blazer, stood straighter, her hand already hovering near the velvet rope. Her voice, tight with fake patience, returned. "Economy is boarding at the other gate. Let's not make this difficult." There it was, that line. "Let's not make this difficult." The universal code for "you're about to be humiliated, but I'll make it sound like you're the problem." Janelle looked around. Every other business class passenger, white, well-dressed, escorted, had passed through with a nod and a "welcome aboard." No delays, no questions, no sideways glances. But Janelle, standing there alone, without an expensive handbag or designer logo splashed across her chest, she didn't look like she belonged, at least not to Camille. Still calm, Janelle held out her boarding pass. Camille didn't even glance at it. "Do you understand what I'm saying, ma'am?" "I understand perfectly," Janelle replied evenly. Camille sighed, dramatically, and took the boarding pass. She studied it longer than necessary, tapping at her tablet like she was solving a security breach. Behind Janelle, someone muttered, "Jesus, it's just a line." Another whispered, "They always try to sneak up." Janelle didn't turn. She didn't need to, because she'd heard it all before, in boardrooms, in law school, in five-star hotel lobbies, but never like this. Never this public, this loud, this deliberate. Camille finally gave a tight nod. "We'll need to verify this with the desk. Step aside." No apology, no welcome. Just pure condescension wrapped in customer service tones. Across the airport terminal, the sun lit the floor like stained glass. But at gate 36B, everything had gone cold. Janelle stepped aside, posture straight, eyes steady. She didn't flinch. But inside something shifted. Not rage, not fear. Precision. Memory. She took a breath. Slow. Grounded. This wasn't the first time. She remembered being 12, asked to leave a department store because this area is not for browsing. She remembered being 22, walking into her first finance interview and being mistaken for the receptionist. She remembered being 34, sitting at a gala table where a donor leaned in and said, "So which exec are you married to?" She wasn't married to anyone in that room. She ran the room. But none of that mattered here, because here, Camille didn't see a CEO. She didn't see a woman who held voting rights on the board of Argent Air Holdings. She saw a black woman in a quiet coat, traveling alone. And that was enough. From her coat pocket, Janelle felt the soft buzz of her phone. A message, encrypted, pinged her from Equinox Capital. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. She already knew what it was, because this wasn't a random flight. This wasn't an accident. This was the final evaluation of a 6-month review she had quietly ordered, after receiving over 30 customer complaints about racial bias on Argent Air flights. She wanted to see it for herself, to feel it. Now she had, and it was time. Camille returned, still holding the boarding pass like it was contaminated. "It appears valid," she said, loud enough to be heard. Not, "It is valid," not, "I'm sorry for the confusion." Just, "It appears valid." Janelle stepped forward. Camille raised her hand again, hesitating. "Ma'am, I'll need to—" "Don't," Janelle said softly. "You've done enough." She took the pass from Camille's fingers, smooth and unbothered. Camille's mouth opened to speak again, but Janelle leaned in slightly, voice so low it was meant only for her. "You might want to stay near the intercom. You'll want to hear what comes next." And just like that, Janelle walked toward the boarding bridge. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Behind her, the line was quiet now. A few people were whispering. Someone had definitely started recording. The crew member beside Camille looked like he'd seen a ghost. But none of it mattered. Because in 7 minutes, a secure call would go out from Equinox Legal to Argent Air's interim CEO. And by the time Janelle's plane reached altitude, Camille wouldn't be working at this airline anymore. When Janelle finally settled into her business class seat, 3A, the hum of the cabin didn't soften the edge still pressing against her ribs. She looked calm. She always did. Her coat folded neatly over her lap, boarding pass tucked away, seatbelt fastened. No anger showed on her face, but behind her eyes, the storm was building. Not the kind that explodes, the kind that waits. Across the aisle, a couple chatted casually in French. A man 2 rows ahead was already asleep, his champagne untouched. Flight attendants bustled around, offering hot towels, welcome drinks, and friendly smiles, none of which had made their way to Janelle yet. But that didn't surprise her, not anymore. The entire ordeal at the gate played on a loop in her head, not because it wounded her ego, but because it confirmed something deeper, something she'd known all along but had hoped just once would prove untrue. She still looked like the girl who didn't belong, not the CEO, not the investor, not the decision-maker who'd saved Argent Air from bankruptcy 2 years ago by funneling $280 million into their emergency restructure. No. To Camille, and dozens like her, Janelle Warren was just a black woman standing in the wrong line. She remembered the first time it happened. 17 years old, high school honors trip to Washington, D.C. She wore her best white blouse, ironed by her mother, and the long navy skirt she saved for church. Her teacher had asked her to lead the group to the museum entrance. But as she reached the front, a security guard stepped forward, blocked her path, and said, "Wait in the student section until your group arrives." He thought she was someone else's responsibility. She had smiled, backed away, and said nothing. That was the day she learned silence could feel like suffocation. A soft chime pulled her back into the present. The head flight attendant, mid-50s, sharp bob, perfectly painted lips, approached her row. She gave a courteous smile to the passenger in 3B, a retired professor, and leaned in. "Mr. Collier, we'd like to offer you a pre-departure glass of champagne or juice." He nodded for the champagne. The attendant turned her eyes toward Janelle, and for the briefest moment, the practiced smile faltered. "And you are?" "Janelle Warren." She didn't offer her boarding pass. She didn't over-explain. She met the woman's gaze like a mirror. The attendant hesitated. It was subtle, just a beat too long, then nodded. "Would you care for something to drink, Miss Warren?" "Sparkling water with lime, please." "Of course." The attendant walked away. It was tiny, barely noticeable, but Janelle noticed, always. She pulled her phone from the seat pocket and opened a hidden app, Equinox Sentinel, a secure executive dashboard. No alerts yet, no change in flight status, but the live internal thread from her legal team was already active. One new message. 9:53 a.m. Initiated. Clause 8. Confirming full control authority under Equinox oversight. She locked the screen. There were still 6 minutes left before her call detonated everything. A flight attendant returned with her drink. "Here you go," she said, tone more composed. Janelle nodded in thanks and took a sip. From across the cabin, a woman in pearls was staring, not maliciously, just curious, trying to place her. Who is she? Why was there a scene at the gate? Why is she here? Dressed like that, sitting here, alone. Janelle didn't blame her. People had been asking that question her whole life. 30 years ago, Janelle's mother stood behind a motel cleaning cart in Detroit, humming to herself while folding bathroom towels. She had dreams for Janelle, college, freedom, respect, but no blueprint for how her daughter would ever survive in boardrooms made for men who looked nothing like her. So Janelle created her own. One scholarship at a time, one extra shift, one rejection, then another, until finally, acceptance letters came. Harvard, Wharton, Yale. She chose neither. Instead, she picked the University of Michigan and later earned her MBA in New York because she didn't want to be seen as chosen by pedigree. She wanted to be undeniable. At 45, Janelle now controlled equity positions across 22 companies, including logistics hubs, media groups, and 4 aviation-adjacent portfolios. But Argentaire, that was personal, because she knew what it felt like to be denied, to be dismissed, to have someone glance at your face and decide, no, you don't belong here. So she bought in, quietly, through a web of limited partnerships. And now, she was here, not as a passenger, as a final audit. From her pocket, her phone vibrated again. 9:56 a.m. Legal confirms. Authority now visible in Argentaire systems. Comms team ready, waiting on your signal. She smiled, faintly. 3 minutes. The seatbelt sign blinked. The captain's voice came overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Argentaire Flight 427 to New York. We expect a smooth flight. Our crew will begin final preparations shortly. Final preparations indeed. Camille reappeared at the front of the business class cabin. Her expression was tighter now, and her posture stiffer. Something had shifted. She could feel it, and though she didn't yet know what, Camille knew that she had made a mistake. Janelle picked up her water glass, swirled the lime. Across from her, the woman in pearls was still watching, pretending not to. Janelle leaned slightly to the side, just enough to meet her eyes. Do you fly Argentaire often? The woman blinked. Yes, sometimes. Why? Just wondering, Janelle replied. Might be your last time seeing it, under this name. The woman chuckled awkwardly. Oh, is something happening? Janelle offered a neutral smile. You'll see. Exactly at 9:57 a.m., she tapped her phone screen. Call placed. It rang once. A crisp voice answered. This is Michael. Go, Janelle said. Full cascade. And Michael? Yes. I want the blacklist published to the industry registry by end of day. Understood. She ended the call. The moment passed like a whisper. To everyone else in the cabin, she was still just a quiet woman sipping water. But in that moment, Argentaire no longer belonged to itself. She looked out the window. The tarmac gleamed in the morning light, clean and indifferent. 7 minutes ago, she had been treated like someone who didn't belong. Now, she owned the airline. The plane had leveled out, cruising high above the Atlantic. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft gold, casting a muted glow over polished wood panels and silent passengers. Somewhere behind the curtain, someone was already snoring. A baby cried faintly in coach, muffled by the hum of engines and privilege. But in row 3A, the tension hadn't relaxed, not even a little. Janelle Warren hadn't spoken since takeoff. She didn't need to. Across the aisle, a man in his 60s glanced at her for the third time in 10 minutes. His suit was finely pressed, his cufflinks understated but expensive. His wife had fallen asleep beside him with a silk scarf over her eyes. But he was wide awake, sipping ginger ale like it might settle more than just his stomach. He kept stealing glances, not with hostility, but with curiosity, like he was trying to place her, because something about her didn't quite add up. She wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't reading. She wasn't on her phone. She was simply present, still, composed. But every movement around her, Camille's unease, the senior attendant's whispers, the tension from the gate, seemed to orbit her. And that man, Mr. Hawkins, according to the crew manifest, had been flying long enough to know that when things orbit someone, it usually means one thing. That person has gravity. In the galley, Camille stood stiffly beside her co-worker. She's not even doing anything, Camille whispered. But I swear to God, something feels off. The other attendant, a younger man named Marco, raised an eyebrow. You mean besides the fact that corporate just pinged our team chat and asked for our cabin footage in real time? Camille paled. What? Yeah. HQ wants timestamps, incident reports, and staff behavior logs. In flight. That's never happened before. Camille blinked, then turned slowly to look toward row 3. Back in her seat, Janelle tapped her thumb once against the phone tucked discreetly in her palm. A small pop-up blinked. Connection secured. Encryption active. She wasn't browsing social media. She was watching them. The feed from Argent Air's internal network streamed in real time. Staff messages, chain of command pings, crew location alerts. Camille's name had appeared 5 times in the past 15 minutes, each one marked with yellow. Behavioral audit in progress. Janelle sipped her water slowly. From the outside, she looked like any other tired executive catching a flight home. But beneath the surface, her systems were already moving. 2 rows back, the young woman in 5A, early 30s, jeans and a blazer, leaned toward her seatmate and whispered, "Is it just me, or does that woman look familiar?" The seatmate shrugged. "I think she's someone. I saw a flight attendant shake after talking to her." They both glanced forward, just as Janelle turned slightly toward the window, her reflection catching the cabin lights. The woman leaned back slowly. "Yeah," she muttered. "She's not just a passenger." Meanwhile, in a command office in Midtown Manhattan, the Equinox Capital Operations team was in full gear. Michael Reynolds, COO and longtime advisor to Janelle, stood at the center of the room surrounded by analysts, lawyers, and systems techs. The screen in front of him showed live footage from Flight 427's business class cabin. "Confirm execution of Clause 8 authority," he said calmly. "Notify Orion Holdings about the merger window." "Already done," someone answered. "They're prepping the joint statement draft now." Michael's eyes narrowed slightly as Camille appeared on screen again, hovering, uncertain, over the drink station. "Let her hang there a bit longer," he said quietly. "Let her wonder." Back on the plane, the older man across the aisle, Mr. Hawkins, leaned slightly toward Janelle. "Excuse me," he said, polite but deliberate. She turned her head. "Yes?" "Forgive me, but I've flown this route over 100 times, and I've never seen crew this nervous." "I get the feeling you're not just flying home." There was no accusation in his tone, just the kind of curiosity that came from living long enough to recognize power when it sat 3 feet away. Janelle looked at him for a long moment. "You're right," she said softly. "I'm not." She returned to her glass, but the man didn't press. He just nodded, slowly, and raised his glass in a subtle toast. "Good," he said. "They don't get away with it anymore." In the back galley, Camille paced. "I didn't do anything wrong," she muttered. Marco raised an eyebrow. "You told her she wasn't on the list. You gave her snacks like she was in economy. You denied her meal preference without checking the log." "She wasn't in the system." "Camille," he said, quietly. "You think that's the point?" Camille's jaw clenched. She gave me a look, like she owned the place. Marco didn't reply, because somewhere deep down, they were both starting to wonder, what if she did? At 36,000 feet, silence held more weight than shouting. And in that silence, Janelle's silence had become a presence, one that couldn't be ignored, one that made people question, one that made the powerful sweat, and made the careless remember. Because power doesn't always arrive in first class with pearls and suits. Sometimes, it comes in quiet jackets, calm eyes, and the kind of stillness that shakes entire systems. And Camille, now wringing her hands in the galley, was starting to realize something terrifying. The woman she'd dismissed might be the one signing her termination papers. The plane was quiet now. The kind of quiet that didn't come from silence, but from tension. Business class had settled into its usual post-meal lull. Window shades drawn, reading lights flickering. The clink of silverware had faded, replaced by the hum of pressurized air and the occasional shuffle of a blanket. But in row 3A, the air felt different. Tighter, heavier. Janelle sat upright, her tray cleared, her drink untouched. Across the aisle, Mr. Hawkins, who had been casually watching her since takeoff, was no longer pretending not to notice. His hands were clasped, elbows on the armrests, as if waiting for something he couldn't name. He wasn't alone. The young woman in 5A had stopped watching her movie. The crew kept glancing toward the galley, whispering. Camille hadn't reappeared in nearly 20 minutes. Something had shifted, and they all felt it. Janelle pulled her phone from the inner pocket of her coat, angled it discreetly, and tapped into her secure line. Michael Reynolds, her COO, answered on the first ring. Status? Merger protocol is ready. All filings approved. Orion's board signed off 10 minutes ago. If you give the go, Argent Air becomes a controlled subsidiary in 60 minutes. And the blacklist? Finalized. Top of the list, Camille Delacroix, Greg Harris, Jason Baker, and Sandra Wilson from the Atlanta incident. That whole crew won't touch another airline job again. Good. Now initiate the internal advisory. I want Argent's executive board notified in real time. Copy that. Do you want to handle the press leak personally? No, Janelle said calmly. Let them find out the same way Camille will. She ended the call. From the outside, it looked like she'd simply checked a text. But inside that cabin, the entire trajectory of a billion-dollar company had just shifted with one quiet call. Far above the Atlantic, a machine began to move. In Midtown Manhattan, the Equinox Capital legal team activated a control trigger notification, a formal notice to Argent Air's CEO and board. Within 90 seconds, 7 executives were pulled from meetings. Within 5, emails were being deleted, phones were ringing, and flight logs were being reviewed. Back in the air, the pilot remained unaware. But Camille felt it. She emerged from the galley slowly, arms stiff, face pale. The calm confidence from before had drained completely. She walked with purpose, but not the kind that came from professionalism. This was damage control. She stopped 3 rows back, glanced toward Janelle, then looked away again. Like staring directly at her had become too risky. She approached Mr. Hawkins instead. Can I get you anything, sir? No, he said, his eyes never leaving Janelle. But I think you should be asking her that. Camille froze, then forced a laugh. Oh, I already took care of her earlier. Did you? The tone of his voice wasn't aggressive, just knowing. It landed like a verdict. Camille backed away. From her seat, Janelle stared ahead, fingers resting on her knee. She didn't gloat, she didn't smirk. Her face remained neutral, almost serene. Because the truth was, this wasn't revenge. This was a correction. She remembered something her grandmother used to say back in Detroit, back when she was just Little Nell, with scraped knees and an opinion too big for her frame. When they call you out of your name, don't shout back. Just keep walking. Let the ground shake under your silence. And now here she was, 35,000 feet in the air, letting the ground shake. In the crew station near the cockpit, Marco's tablet pinged. He checked it once, then again. A red banner now stretched across the top of the internal communication feed. Urgent. Executive Authority restructure. Flight 427 involved. All staff on alert. His heart skipped. He looked toward Camille, who was now pretending to check the service cart. Camille, he whispered. Come here. She walked over. He tilted the tablet. She read the banner. Her knees nearly buckled. That can't be real. It is. Why would they? You told the wrong woman she didn't belong. In row 3, Mr. Hawkins leaned forward slightly, voice low. If you don't mind me asking, who are you? Janelle didn't look at him. Not yet. She was watching the curtain near the front of the plane. One of the more senior flight supervisors had stepped out from first class and was now on her in-flight phone, whispering into it with her back turned. She was getting the alert. The ripple was beginning. Finally, Janelle turned to Hawkins. I'm the one who told them to stop pretending this was about policy. He blinked, then smiled, slowly. Thought so. 2 rows behind, the young woman from earlier pulled out her phone, searched quietly, and typed, "Janelle Warren Airline." The screen loaded, and her eyes went wide. "Oh my God," she turned to her seatmate. "She's not just someone. She owns the airline." In the cockpit, the first officer's earpiece buzzed. The message came directly from HQ. He read it twice, then turned to the captain. "Sir, we just got a level 1 advisory. The woman in business class, row 3A, is now listed as acting executive oversight for Argent Air." The captain blinked. "You mean corporate oversight?" "No, sir. I mean the oversight. She's the top authority right now." The captain paused, then said nothing. Back in business class, Camille reappeared one last time. She held out a folded linen napkin with trembling hands. "Miss Warren," she said, voice brittle, "your dessert." "I apologize for the earlier confusion. I didn't mean to—" "Yes," Janelle said, calmly. "You did." Camille flinched. Janelle looked at her, not unkindly, but without warmth. "It's okay. You don't need to serve me anymore." Camille lowered her eyes. Her hands shook as she set the napkin down, then turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last. Janelle picked up the spoon, stirred the untouched tea sorbet once, then set it aside. She didn't need sweetness right now. She needed clarity. And at 36,000 feet, clarity had finally arrived. The hum of the engines masked a tension that no longer hid beneath the surface. It was in the air now, thick, charged. Everyone in business class felt it. The kind of silence that said, "Pay attention, something's happening." Not loud, not chaotic, just shifting. Camille hadn't returned to row 3A since she placed the sorbet on Janelle's tray with trembling hands. She was now seated in the small crew jump seat behind the galley partition, staring blankly at her hands. "It's okay. You don't need to serve me anymore." Those words echoed in her ears louder than any shouted insult could have, because they weren't angry. They were final, and they came from a woman whose calm had broken her more than fury ever could. 3 rows behind, the young woman who'd Googled Janelle minutes ago was still clutching her phone. Her eyes were wide, her screen still glowing with headlines. "Equinox Capital CEO Janelle Warren completes hostile takeover of Argent Air. Black female CEO quietly controls aviation powerhouse. The most powerful woman you've never heard of just made her move." She nudged her seatmate, whispering, "That's her, that's her." "Who?" the man asked, taking off his headphones. "The woman in row 3, the one Camille humiliated at the gate." "Wait, the owner?" "The CEO. She just merged Argent Air with her holding company. That's what the alert was." The man sat back slowly, absorbing the weight of it. So she wasn't being dramatic back there. No, she was being gracious. In row 2A, Mr. Hawkins still hadn't stopped watching. But now his gaze wasn't curious. It was reverent. He looked at Janelle the way a veteran looks at a soldier who just walked back into the room, medals hidden under plain clothes. He raised a hand lightly, trying not to draw attention. "Miss Warren." She turned to him, not coldly, just present. "Yes? You don't need to say anything. I just wanted to tell you, thank you for not staying silent." She studied him for a second, then nodded once, deeply. "You're welcome." It wasn't ceremony. It was recognition. A few rows behind, a middle-aged woman with short gray hair tapped gently on the shoulder of a flight attendant. Not Camille, but Marco, the one who hadn't looked away during the boarding scene. "Excuse me," she said. "Is she really who they say she is?" Marco didn't answer with words. He simply nodded once, then lowered his eyes. The woman glanced toward row 3A and whispered, to no one in particular, "I knew something felt different. She walked like she had nothing to prove, but everything to change." In the galley, Camille's hands wouldn't stop shaking. "It's over," she muttered. "It's over." Marco stood nearby, arms crossed, watching her spiral. "Camille," he said quietly, "you made her feel small, and she gave you the chance to stop. Twice. I didn't know she was. That's the point, Marco interrupted, voice low. You didn't care who she was until she had power. You just didn't see her. So that makes me racist? No, he said. That makes you blind and careless and now accountable. Janelle sat still, but not rigid. There was no pride in her expression, no victory, only clarity. She glanced down at her phone. 10:46 a.m. Michael. Press embargo ends in 7 mines. Executive transition goes public. She nodded once to herself. No speech, no announcement. The world would learn the truth without her having to say a word. 20 minutes later, the captain's voice came overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be descending into JFK shortly. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. The cabin stirred. Blankets folded, trays locked. But the passengers didn't rush, because no one on this flight would leave it the same. As the plane dipped lower, Janelle stared out the window at the New York skyline rising to meet them. She thought of her mother, still in Detroit, who'd told her over the phone last week, "One day, baby, they'll have to call you by your name, not the one they make up, the one you earned." That day had come, and Janelle hadn't raised her voice once. When the wheels touched down, a small ripple of applause broke out. But this time, it wasn't for the landing. It was for her. Quiet, respectful, earned. Camille didn't clap. She sat frozen, pale and sweating. She didn't need anyone to tell her. She wouldn't be flying for Argent Air again. As passengers began to gather their belongings, Mr. Hawkins paused beside Janelle's seat. "Do you mind if I walk with you through the terminal?" She smiled softly. "Only if you don't mind the press cameras." He chuckled. "For once, I don't." They exited together. Behind them, whispers followed. Phones buzzed. Articles were already circulating. Flight 427 would become legend, not because of turbulence, but because someone who was told she didn't belong quietly took it all back. Have you ever seen someone get dismissed, only for the world to realize they were the most powerful person in the room? Let us know in the comments below. Sometimes silence speaks louder than anything else. The doors of Gate 36B slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Janelle stepped into the terminal, her carry-on rolling quietly beside her, heels clicking against the tile. Beside her, Mr. Hawkins walked with deliberate grace. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to, because around them, silence wasn't possible anymore. 3 rows of passengers followed behind, slower than usual. Most weren't even thinking about luggage. They were watching her, not with suspicion, not with judgment, but with that special kind of awe reserved for those who'd just rewritten the rules. And somewhere at the edge of the gate, a young man in a denim jacket lifted his phone and began live streaming. "You guys won't believe this," he whispered. "The woman they tried to throw off the plane, she owns the airline, and she just fired everyone who disrespected her." Behind him, phones lifted, screens glowed, words traveled like wildfire. Janelle walked steadily. Her expression was calm, but her steps had the sharp precision of someone who knew exactly where she was going. As she passed one of the gate podiums, an Argent Air agent did a double take, then leaned into her headset. "Control, we've got a situation. Passenger Janelle Warren is heading toward Concourse B. I think she's involved in the advisory notice." Her voice cracked near the end. In a back office behind the terminal, 3 mid-level managers stared at their monitors. The alert had gone out system-wide 30 minutes ago, but now the footage was live, viral. The tags were trending, as she owns the airline. Business class backfire, #Janelle Warren. One supervisor wiped sweat from his brow. "We need to call the director, right now." "Too late," another muttered, tapping his screen. "She's already on her way down." Outside Gate 36B, Camille stood frozen near the crew door. She hadn't spoken since the plane landed. Her uniform suddenly felt too tight, her name badge too loud. Passengers had streamed past her without a glance, but one woman, An older black lady with silver hair had paused, just long enough to look her in the eye and shake her head. Nothing more, but it had landed harder than any reprimand. Camille's stomach twisted. In the main terminal, security personnel were repositioning, not to escort anyone out, but to hold back crowds forming at the arrival area. Media interns from 2 local stations had already shown up with mics and tripods. A reporter for the New York Post was tweeting live. Confirmed, Equinox CEO Janelle Warren landed at JFK. Source says she triggered board-level takeover of Argent Air mid-flight. Developing. By the time Janelle and Mr. Hawkins reached the end of the jetway, every eye in the terminal was on her, but no one said a word. Not yet. Then a woman in a wheelchair, seated near the arrival's sign, looked up from her phone. Her eyes widened. "Miss Warren?" Janelle paused. The woman motioned toward her camera. "My granddaughter just sent me the clip, the one from the flight." Janelle nodded politely. The woman's voice trembled. "Thank you for standing your ground, for doing what most of us couldn't." That was when the silence broke. A ripple of applause, soft, scattered, but real, not manufactured, not polite, earned. Janelle kept walking. She didn't wave. She didn't bow. She just kept going, like a woman with a plan larger than applause. Back at the operations floor above Concourse B, the terminal director, Dana Walsh, stormed into the crisis room. "Status?" One of the staffers looked up, pale. "She's already here." "Has she said anything?" "No, ma'am. She hasn't had to." Dana swore under her breath. "Get Argent Air's acting CEO on the line now. She's in a board call with Orion Holdings. Tell her to make room. She no longer runs this airport without Ms. Warren's say-so." Down below, Marco, still in uniform, now off shift, stood at a distance watching Janelle move through the terminal. She hadn't even looked at Camille after landing. She hadn't needed to, and yet somehow, Camille looked smaller with every step Janelle took. Marco sighed. There was a strange relief in watching justice unfold without force. No yelling, no security scuffles, just clarity. Near the escalator to baggage claim, a cluster of airport employees had gathered in hushed conversation. "That's her, the black woman from the video. You see how she handled that? Like it wasn't the first time. Like she was already 10 steps ahead." Then one voice, quiet but clear, spoke from the edge. "Maybe now they'll stop telling women like us we're in the wrong line." Just before reaching the exit, Janelle paused. She turned slightly toward Mr. Hawkins. "Thank you for walking with me." He smiled. "It was my honor." Most people wouldn't have spoken up. "Most people don't know how," he said. "But the moment you looked back at Camille, I realized you weren't just standing there for yourself." She nodded once, slowly. "None of us ever are." Across the glass, press cameras clicked to life. A reporter lifted her mic. "Ms. Warren, can you comment on what happened on board Argent Air Flight 427? Janelle turned toward the crowd. Flashes popped. Phones rose. But she didn't speak into the mic. Instead, she leaned slightly toward the reporter and asked, "Would you like a copy of the new passenger equity policy we'll be enforcing next quarter?" The woman blinked, caught off guard. Yes, of course." Janelle smiled faintly, then walked on. At the end of the terminal, a car waited. One of her aides stood by the door, tablet in hand. "Michael just sent confirmation. All major outlets have the press release. Shareholders are already reacting positively." "And the crew?" "Notified. Blacklisted. HR has been looped into retraining audits across all Argent Air hubs, and Orion has already adopted the new conduct standards." Janelle exhaled, calm, controlled. "Let's move forward then." She stepped into the car. Behind her, JFK buzzed with the sound of something shifting, a system adjusting, an industry bracing, because justice hadn't arrived in a press conference. It had walked off a plane in silence and changed everything. It started with a whisper on social media, a hashtag. A 28-second video clip. A still frame of a black woman in a navy coat walking calmly through JFK Terminal with a crowd parting like waves. Then came the headline, "She owns the airline." By mid-morning, that whisper had become a thunderclap. The press conference was called for 4:00 p.m. sharp, just 6 hours after Flight 427 touched down. No grand stage, no sweeping flag backdrop. Just a clean podium in the Equinox Capitol press room. Glass walls, soft lighting, a muted Equinox logo on the wall behind it. By 3:50 p.m., the room was packed. Reporters from CNN, NPR, Reuters, The New York Times, and 24 digital outlets filled the seats. Producers whispered into earpieces. A camera crew from a French news network set up with a long boom mic. They weren't here just to cover a business move. They were here to watch a woman who'd been humiliated quietly reclaim everything. At exactly 4:01 p.m., Janelle Warren stepped up to the podium. She wasn't wearing anything extravagant, just a black blouse, a slate gray blazer, and a gold watch that caught the light like it knew the truth. Her expression was calm, not defensive, not triumphant, just clear. She looked out over the crowd of cameras and voices and questions waiting to explode, and she spoke. "Good afternoon. I won't be taking many questions today, not because I don't have answers, but because this moment is not about spectacle. This morning, I was told I didn't belong in a line I'd paid for. Then I was told I wasn't listed, despite presenting valid identification. And then I was told, implicitly and explicitly, that I didn't look like someone who should be sitting in business class." She paused. Let the words breathe. Let them settle. What followed wasn't rage. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I made a decision. Not just about a crew member, not just about an airline, but about a system that has quietly told too many people for far too long that dignity must be earned by appearance, by accent, by proximity to privilege. The room was dead silent. A single camera shutter clicked in the back. She continued. Effective immediately, Equinox Capital has finalized its controlling merger of Argent Air. And alongside that, we are enacting the following reforms. A mandatory customer conduct certification for all frontline staff across all 9 Equinox-aligned airlines. A zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, explicit or implied, enforced through anonymous passenger audits. A universal dignity clause. No passenger, regardless of attire, race, language, or travel frequency, may be deprioritized without cause. She looked up, locked eyes with the front row. Bias hides best in small places. We're turning on the lights. Back in Detroit, Janelle's mother watched the live broadcast on her TV. She'd called her church group. They all sat on the edge of her living room couch. Her hand trembled around her tea mug. "That's my baby," she whispered. "That's little Nell." In a New York newsroom, a producer cued the anchor for a live take. "What we're witnessing today," the anchor said, "is not just a business story, it's a cultural one. A reckoning in real time, led by someone who never once raised her voice." On the press floor, a journalist from The Guardian stood. "Ms. Warren, if I may, do you see this as a personal victory?" Janelle considered that, then answered, "This isn't about personal victory. It's about structural change. Because the people most often silenced aren't asking for power, they're asking for fairness." Another hand shot up. "Will any staff members be publicly named or punished?" Janelle's tone didn't waver. "No one will be shamed, but everyone will be held accountable." At that moment, "She owns the airline" reached 6.2 million tweets. The clip of Camille turning red at the boarding gate had looped over 11 million times. But the clip of Janelle saying, "We're turning on the lights?" That one was climbing faster. Meanwhile, on an internal Argent Air forum, thousands of employees read the memo in real time. New policy directive. Effective immediately. All crew and customer-facing staff will undergo intensive anti-bias and discretion training. Effective within 30 days. Failure to comply results in suspension. A comment from a veteran flight attendant popped up. About damn time, another replied. I saw her once in passing. Thought she was a quiet exec. Didn't know she was a hurricane in disguise. Across the country, talk shows lit up. A host on daytime TV leaned forward in her chair. The way she walked off that plane with her chin up, that's how you do it. No yelling, no drama, just justice, with interest. Janelle closed the press conference with a line that would become the new tagline for every airline she controlled. You don't need a title to deserve respect, but sometimes it takes a title to demand it, for everyone else. She stepped back from the podium. She didn't linger. She didn't wave. She just walked out, again, with the calm of someone who knew the work was just beginning. In the hallway outside, Michael Reynolds waited with a tablet. The coverage is overwhelmingly positive, he said. Investors are backing the merger. Orion just confirmed. They're ready to adopt all reforms. Janelle nodded once. What about Camille? HR will handle her exit, quietly, with documentation. We're not making an example. Good. We don't need martyrs. We need change. That night, Janelle sat alone in her Manhattan apartment. She poured a glass of water, sat by the window. The city lights blinked far below. She opened her phone, checked one last alert. Dignity clause, top search phrase in US Google Trends, plus 82% in 12 hours. She didn't smile. She just locked the screen, leaned back, and exhaled. Because she hadn't gone looking for attention. But now that it had found her, she was going to make sure it meant something. The first ripple wasn't loud. It didn't come from a headline or a board meeting. It came from a memo. 1 page, 6 paragraphs, sent to every airline partner in the Equinox Holdings network. Subject line: Implementation of Passenger Dignity Clause, immediate enforcement. Within 48 hours, 7 domestic carriers and 2 international codeshare partners had acknowledged receipt and initiated internal review. By the end of the week, Argent Air lost 11 middle managers. Not because they were fired, but because they resigned before anyone could ask them to explain their records. They knew. The system had turned. At a coffee shop inside LaGuardia Airport, 2 flight attendants in Navy uniforms sat huddled over a phone. You see this? One whispered, sliding her screen over. It showed a clip of Janelle Warren walking out of the press conference saying, You don't need a title to deserve respect, but sometimes it takes a title to demand it, for everyone else. The second attendant nodded slowly. My cousin works corporate at Jetline. They're already rewriting their bias training protocols. Because of her? Because she's not backing down. They fell silent, until the first one muttered, I wish she'd come through our route. Some of our supervisors could use that wake-up call. In a suburban house outside Atlanta, Greg Harris sat slumped at his kitchen table. His laptop screen glared at him. 2 weeks ago, he was the head teller at Liberty Financial's flagship branch. Now, his LinkedIn profile showed a polite phrase, open to new opportunities. But no one was calling. No interviews, no callbacks, nothing but silence. And worse, his name had quietly appeared on 3 internal HR watch lists across Equinox-affiliated institutions. Unofficial blacklists. He rubbed his forehead. He wanted to blame the media, the board, even Janelle herself. But deep down, he knew. He hadn't just enforced policy that day. He had enjoyed it. That was what sealed his fate. Meanwhile, Jason Baker, the smirking teller from the same bank branch, had tried to rebrand himself. He posted a video on social media titled, How Cancel Culture Kills Growth, My Story. It bombed. The top comment read, Bro, you said she didn't look like someone with money. That's not growth. That's just racism in khakis. But Camille vanished. No videos, no interviews, not even an apology post. Her resignation had been processed quietly, as per Equinox HR policy. A soft exit. But nothing on the internet stays quiet. Screenshots of her profile, TikToks dissecting her words, Instagram reels comparing her cold voice at the gate with Janelle's calm reply. She became a case study, not in evil, but in how easy it is to humiliate someone when you think no one's watching, and how costly it becomes when the world decides to care. Back in Manhattan, Janelle sat in her office on the 58th floor of Equinox Tower. She hadn't given another interview, hadn't tweeted, hadn't stepped into another press room. She didn't need to. The work was happening below the surface. Legal teams were drafting clauses. Tech teams were coding behavior reporting apps for passengers. HR was finalizing contracts with a third-party audit firm to shadow travel experiences anonymously. Michael Reynolds stood by her office window, tablet in hand. Jetline just agreed to adopt the dignity clause. That's 6 out of 9, Janelle replied without looking up. Also, Michael hesitated. You're being nominated for Forbes Power 100 list, and someone from The Atlantic wants to do a long-form profile. Janelle didn't respond right away. She closed the file she'd been reading. Power isn't the story, Michael. Restraint is. Michael nodded. Then we'll decline. She gave a single nod. Across the country, a ripple was turning into a wave. At LAX, a ground staff supervisor was terminated for demeaning a Latino family in line at security. The passenger had filmed it. The clip ended with the caption, "What would Janelle do?" At O'Hare, a crew member stepped in when a fellow attendant denied priority boarding to a disabled veteran because he was wearing jeans. The intercom cut in with, "Sir, we apologize for the confusion. Let me walk you to your seat personally." The veteran turned and asked, half joking, "You trying to pull a Janelle Warren?" The attendant smiled, trying to live up to her. And back at JFK, something had changed in the way people moved. Gate agents spoke slower, supervisors hovered less, and every so often, someone walking alone, especially someone in plain clothes or speaking accented English, was treated with a little more care. Not because they were suspected to be powerful, but because now everyone knew they might be. At her desk, Janelle opened a handwritten letter. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a note. "Dear Ms. Warren, I'm a retired flight supervisor. I spent 30 years telling women like you that rules are rules. But last week, I stood up for a girl who was told she couldn't use the priority line because her backpack looked cheap. I didn't do it because I feared getting fired. I did it because you reminded me what respect looks like and what it sounds like when it's done with grace. Thank you, R." Janelle folded the letter carefully and smiled, because the ripple didn't just move outward. It came back. It came back in the form of little correction, quiet courage, and people realizing that silence wasn't neutral. It was participation. And now, people were choosing differently. Have you ever seen a quiet moment spark real change? Tell us below. Sometimes it's not the loudest voice that leaves the deepest impact. It didn't happen all at once. There was no national address, no viral meltdown, no single camera that captured the moment the system began to change. But it did change. Because systems don't shift with noise, they shift with patterns. And the pattern that began with Janelle Warren, quietly, firmly, unapologetically, was starting to replicate itself in places she had never stepped foot in. At Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, a 19-year-old first-time traveler stepped out of the TSA line in tears. Her ID was real, her boarding pass valid. Her only mistake was looking nervous and having an ethnic last name no one wanted to pronounce correctly. Before anyone else could move, a middle-aged black woman wearing a staff badge stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said to her coworker. "I'll handle this one." She walked the young woman back to the front of the line, looked her in the eye, and said, "We've been you before. We won't be you again." The traveler nodded silently, then whispered, "Janelle Warren?" The agent smiled. "Every day." At Toronto Pearson, an airline manager rewrote the pre-flight crew checklist to include a 5-second scan. Do any interactions feel uneven? Did we make anyone feel lesser? It was unofficial, but by the end of the week, 5 other supervisors had copied the same checklist. By the end of the month, it had become a formal HR form. No one said it was because of Janelle. They didn't have to. Inside Equinox Tower, Janelle reviewed 3 new proposals, each from different sectors: a luxury hotel chain, a global rideshare company, a fast-growing intercity train startup. All of them had read the press coverage. All of them had seen the phrase that kept returning in article after article: the dignity clause may be the most quietly radical corporate reform of the decade. And now, everyone wanted in. Not for PR, not for likes, but because the public had drawn a line, finally, and no one wanted to be on the wrong side of it. Michael Reynolds stood by her desk. Orion Holdings confirmed their third-party audit begins next week. And the HR dashboard? Live in 5 cities. Janelle closed the folder on her desk. We don't move fast for attention. We move fast so people don't suffer while we figure it out. Michael smiled. That's going in the culture handbook. Put it on the inside cover. Meanwhile, at a small regional airport in South Carolina, an elderly white gentleman approached the counter at gate 12. The attendant glanced at him, then turned to help a younger man behind him. Asian, soft-spoken, dressed plainly. The gentleman cleared his throat. Miss, he was ahead of me. She blinked. Oh, I didn't realize. Doesn't matter why, he said kindly. Just make it right. The younger man nodded in thanks. They stood next to each other, quietly. Then the older man leaned in, almost conspiratorially. Heard about that Janelle Warren woman. Never met her, but I think she's my kind of people. Back in Detroit, Janelle's mother, Ms. Dolores Warren, was invited to speak at her local community center. She wore her best blue church dress and matching hat. Her daughter had mailed her the new Equinox policy booklet, laminated in a leather-bound folder. She held it up like a hymn book. You don't have to yell to change the world, she told the room. Sometimes you just have to make sure the world can't look away. Somewhere in Texas, a former airline employee, Camille Delacroix, checked into her first day at a diversity training firm. She didn't walk in with pride. She walked in with humility. She was no longer the trainer. She was the trainee. She didn't introduce herself by name at first, but on day 3, she stood up and said to the room, I used to think unconscious bias was a thing other people had, but I learned the hard way. You don't have to be loud to do damage. And if you're lucky, you get the chance to clean up what you broke before someone else has to fix it for you. No one clapped, but someone passed her a tissue, and maybe that was enough. At the Equinox press office, Janelle declined 2 more TV interviews. She didn't need to be seen anymore, because by now, people were acting differently in her name, and that was louder than any spotlight. A new Equinox report showed that passenger complaints across the top 5 partner airlines had dropped by 37% in the last quarter. Not because passengers were quieter, but because employees were listening. And for the first time in a long time, people were being treated like people. That Sunday morning, Janelle sat alone on her balcony, coffee in hand, phone face down. No alerts, no calls, no interviews, just quiet. The good kind. The kind you earn after standing through the storm. The kind you keep when you decide not to fight for attention, but to fight for others. She took a sip. The wind moved through her curls. Then she stood up and walked back inside. There was work to do. And the system? The system was finally listening. Exactly 1 year had passed. 1 year since the boarding gate at JFK. 1 year since a woman in a Navy coat stood still while the world misjudged her. 1 year since a single line, "You might want to stay near the intercom. You'll want to hear what comes next," became the quietest declaration of power the airline industry had ever heard. In the time since, Janelle Warren's name had been spoken in rooms she never entered. She wasn't a celebrity. She didn't launch a podcast. She didn't take a book deal, though 5 publishers had offered. What she did was continue to show up, at her office, at shareholder briefings, at working lunches with auditors who didn't expect the CEO to take notes, because she wasn't trying to be iconic. She was trying to fix what had been broken for too long. But outside those rooms, The world had already crowned her something else. At airports, crew members whispered her name like a quiet safeguard. At high schools, social studies teachers assigned essays on the dignity clause, not for politics, but for ethics. And at one mid-sized airport in North Carolina, a little bronze plaque was installed above the business class boarding lane. Every seat is earned, but every person is worthy. W. Back in Detroit, at the neighborhood church she grew up in, a mural had been painted. It wasn't large, just a corner wall near the food pantry, but it showed a little black girl in a Sunday dress standing at a boarding gate, facing a giant wall made of paper. Boarding passes, rejection slips, warning signs. And next to her stood a woman in a navy blazer holding out her hand, not to break the wall, but to walk through it. Somewhere across the country, Linda Brown, the receptionist from Liberty Financial, the one who told the elderly Asian couple to just take a ticket and wait, sat at her kitchen table writing her third apology letter of the year. Not forced letters, not court-mandated, just handwritten notes she mailed out one by one after attending a local community equity course she enrolled in voluntarily. At the top of her notebook were these words: "Invisible doesn't mean harmless." She wrote them down the day she watched Janelle's press conference for the first time. In a downtown Los Angeles office, Amy Sanders, the former teller who'd watched in silence as Janelle was humiliated at the counter, now led internal culture training for a mid-sized fintech firm. She never started her sessions with stats or policies. She started with a question. Have you ever been in the room when something wrong happened and done nothing? She let the silence do the teaching. In row 2 of an Argent cross-country flight, a young black girl sat next to her father, clutching her new backpack. The crew member, a white woman in her 40s, bent down with a smile. "Welcome aboard, miss. Let me know if you'd like a ginger ale or apple juice before takeoff." The girl blinked. "My name's Jordan. I'm going to meet my auntie." The crew member nodded. "Tell your auntie that you flew like a VIP today." Jordan giggled. Her father, once unsure whether to expect kindness or coldness, let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. At Equinox headquarters, Michael Reynolds stood in the corner of the boardroom as Janelle finished presenting the company's latest quarterly report. Her tone was calm, clear, focused, as always. But this time, when she closed the laptop and looked up, the room didn't just nod in approval. They stood. Every member of the board, every senior partner, every executive advisor. They rose, not because it was part of protocol, but because after 12 months, they understood. They hadn't just followed her leadership. They had witnessed her legacy begin. After the meeting, one of the younger legal analysts approached her in the hallway. He looked nervous. "Ms. Warren, sorry to bother you. I just wanted to say, when I joined, I didn't know what this company really stood for." She raised an eyebrow, kindly. "And now? Now I know what I want my name to stand for. Thank you." Janelle gave a small smile. "Then do the work, quietly, consistently. That's how names earn weight." That evening, she returned to her apartment. She poured a cup of tea, opened her windows, let the spring air drift in. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Just saw you mentioned on the evening news again. But don't worry. I told the ladies at choir you're still my shy little girl who hated lace socks." Janelle smiled, then set the phone down and looked out over the city. Lights flickered across rooftops. A siren wailed far in the distance. Somewhere, someone was probably being told they didn't belong in a room, or a seat, or a story. And somewhere else, someone was about to say, "Actually, they do." Because legacy isn't just what's written about you. It's what changes because of you, long after you leave the room. The airport hadn't changed. The same polished floors, the same humming escalators, the same scent of burnt espresso near gate 36B. But something in the air felt different. Not louder, not softer, just more awake. Janelle stepped through the sliding glass doors of Liberty Concourse in Atlanta, the very same terminal where exactly 12 months ago she'd been told she didn't belong. She wasn't here on official business. No board meeting, no press conference, no security entourage. Just a gray trench coat, a slim leather laptop bag, and a boarding pass tucked quietly in her coat pocket. She passed the spot where a security guard once gripped her arm without cause. The window where Amy Sanders once fumbled with her ID. The glass counter where Sandra Wilson's voice had rung out like a verdict. "We don't serve people like you." But this time, there was no gripping, no fumbling, no verdict. Just morning sunlight spilling across the floor and a different kind of rhythm in the air. At the customer assistance desk, a young woman in her early 20s adjusted her badge and greeted each traveler with a sincerity Janelle hadn't seen before in this building. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" "Yes, ma'am. I'd be happy to walk you to the kiosk myself." "Take your time. No rush at all." Her name tag read Carmen. She wore no makeup. Her ponytail was slightly lopsided. Her blazer was a bit too big, but she moved with purpose. And when a frail, elderly woman with a thick Nigerian accent approached, fumbling with a crumpled boarding pass and mispronouncing the gate number, Carmen didn't flinch. She smiled. "You're headed to gate 34C, ma'am. May I walk with you?" "I am sorry. I do not know how to go there." "You don't have to know," Carmen said gently. "That's my job." And she did it. Step by step, arm in arm, no fanfare, no drama, just dignity in action. Janelle watched from a few feet away, and in that moment, she felt something deeper than vindication. She felt completion, not because everything was fixed, not because every system had been healed, but because someone had been trained right. And that meant the ripples were still moving. She checked in, passed security, and arrived at the terminal, gate 36B, where it all began. There, she spotted a few new posters. "Every guest deserves grace." "Equinox Passenger Equity Policy." "Ask us how it works." And just below it, a small plaque near the boarding lane. "This location proudly upholds the dignity clause inspired by the events of Flight 427. We see you, we serve you, we value you. Equinox Holdings." She didn't stop to read the plaque. She didn't need to. She'd written the first draft. A few rows back in the waiting area, a woman in her mid-40s, short hair, pressed slacks, was watching her. She stared for a few seconds too long, then tapped something on her phone. Cross-referenced, froze. Her name was Allison Bright. She worked in internal training for a tech startup. She wasn't famous, but she was paying attention. She turned to her seatmate. "You see that woman in the gray coat?" "Yeah, that's her." "Her who?" "Her, the CEO from the boarding incident last year. She changed policy across 4 airlines." Her seatmate's eyes widened. "The one who didn't say a word but shut the whole thing down?" "Exactly." They both looked again. But Janelle wasn't doing anything special, just sipping tea from a terminal cafe and glancing at her gate number like any other traveler. Still, something about her made the whole area feel steadier, like she was keeping the room honest. Boarding began on time. The gate agent, a black man in his 30s with braided hair and a calm voice, called passengers by row, smiled between announcements, and made sure every person was acknowledged. Not just VIPs, not just suits, everyone. An elderly black man in a denim jacket approached with confusion in his eyes. "Son, is this the right line for Group A? I got this here ticket, but Let me take a look, sir," the agent said, gently. He studied the boarding pass, nodded. "You're not only in the right line, you're my first passenger in business class today. Welcome aboard." The man blinked. "Oh, I ain't never been welcomed like that before." The agent smiled. "Then let's fix that for good." Janelle stepped forward next. The agent looked up, met her eyes, and paused, only for a second. Then he offered a calm nod. Not because he recognized her from the news, but because he recognized what she stood for. "Have a great flight, ma'am." "Thank you." She stepped onto the jet bridge. No camera crew, no entourage, no viral moment. Just her and her shadow and a line of passengers who, for the first time in a long time, were walking into a system that saw them. As the flight settled and seatbelts clicked, Janelle glanced out the window. Carmen, the young staffer from earlier, was walking along the terminal with the Nigerian grandmother still at her side, carrying her tote bag for her. Janelle smiled softly. The next generation was already doing the work. Somewhere at the back of the cabin, Allison, the woman from the terminal, pulled out her journal. She wrote, "Saw Janelle Warren today. No cameras, no headlines. Just her walking in grace." The room shifted when she moved, and somehow, I wanted to be better just by watching her. That's legacy. That's what change looks like when it breathes. As the plane pulled away from the gate, the sun broke through the clouds. A beam of light hit the plaque inside the terminal. "We see you. We serve you. We value you." And for the first time since this journey began, no one had to prove they belonged. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone didn't need to say a word, but still changed the room? We'd love to hear about it in the comments. Sometimes, the quietest strength leaves the loudest legacy.